Last Sunday, we heard about the Lord calling and sending Moses to do an impossible task of rescuing oppressed slaves from Pharaoh's land. And now this week we skip 40 years. We skip the miraculous parting of the sea and the Lord rescuing Israel from enemies. Skip the Lord providing manna in the wilderness that the people did not get. Skip the Lord giving water all along the way. Skip the Lord guiding the journey with a pillar of smoke by day and fire by night, the first nightlight for frightened children. And we skip the Lord organizing this rabble of ex-slaves into a nation of laws and agencies. A lot has happened in 40 years. A new nation was born. A seminal moment occurred in God's saving history and in Israel's identity. The Lord has intervened in human affairs, has acted in history, has come to this earth to dwell among God's people. And now Israel stands at the border of the Promised Land. The first generation has passed away, and their children take over, ready to return home. Deuteronomy is Moses' last sermon of instruction for this new nation. He reminds them of just who they are and who has made them this day. By God's grace, by the hand of the Lord Almighty, by the providence of a loving God, they shall enter into their inheritance. And Moses begins by reminding them of God's grace. The Ten Commandments begin with remembering just who has acted and has given. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. All we are and all we have is by the grace of God. What you and I are today is by God's generous love. What comforts we enjoy, what wealth we have, what community and place we know is all by God's great generosity. And then whatever follows is response to our gracious, loving God. And then 10 statements of what is, statements of reality. It's important to keep in mind that the 10 Commandments are given after God makes a covenant with the people. The 10 Commandments come after God promises to be their God, promises to never abandon, promises to bless and keep and protect and provide. So these commandments are not orders, not imperatives of what we must do. The 10 Commandments are not what we must do to earn God's favor. God's favor has already come to us. The 10 Commandments are not how we prove our obedience and be good boys and girls. God does not want our obedience. God wants our trusting love. So the commandments should not be read as what we have to do. Rather, these commandments are descriptions of what God's kingdom actually looks like. Not commandments to obey, but promises of what is already, what is the reality of life. And so the first, you shall have no other gods before me. Not choice of ours, but statement of fact. The Lord God is here. The Lord God is in command. The Lord God is the only God we have, and no other has authority. Fact. Not up to us. God's kingdom has only one Lord and only one in charge. That's just the way it is. Any other God we bring in, any other gods in which we put our trust, wealth, nation, privilege, ability, luck, are only intruders, usurpers. Fact. The Lord your God, who gave all this to you in the first place, is your God. Read this way, the 10 Commandments give a glimpse of what God's kingdom looks like in everyday life. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. In other words, do not lie about someone else. Simple fact. In a world where people make up things about another, where people attack and denigrate and call names, is a world where truth is invalidated and where trust is broken and where communication and social structures break down and chaos ensues. But God's kingdom is one where honesty with one another gives stability to relationships and stability to community. Martin Luther, above all, was a pastor to his congregation. He so deeply desired that every person know God personally. Martin Luther wrote the Small Catechism as an easy instruction manual for families to use in their homes to teach children. And he famously describes each commandment by starting out, what does this mean? The 8th commandment, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. What does this mean? He writes, we are to fear and love God so that we do not tell lies about our neighbor, betray or slander them, or destroy their reputations. Instead, we are to come to their defense, speak well of them, and interpret everything they do in the best possible light. Simple fact. God's kingdom is one where we speak well of others, where we defend them when slandered with racist remarks. God's kingdom is one where each one of us interprets the presence and behaviors of another in the best possible light, assumes the best of them, assumes their intentions are good. God's kingdom is where each of us begins with welcoming and engaging another as one who belongs and has a right to be and is honorable. When this does not happen, we have suddenly stepped out of God's kingdom and suddenly stand opposed to God. Last Sunday, there was an incident here at Lake Nokomis. I don't know what was said or who was involved in this. I don't know. But one of the dedicated teachers of Hennepin Middle School came in on his day off to prepare his classroom for the week. He is an excellent teacher, cares about his students, goes out of his way for them. As you know, Hennepin Middle School occupies some of the rooms of this church to provide education to children, most who are non-white. Lake Nokomis benefits considerably from them by the rent they pay, quarter of our church budget, by association in the education they give to children beyond our own, by enhancing our reputation as a place that is open and welcoming of people of other races and faith. We need them. We cannot afford this church without them. And we cannot serve families in the way that they do. The teacher who came in last Sunday to prepare for school was confronted by one of our own members, questioning his belonging there. And the teacher was offended and upset. His presence was not interpreted in the best possible light. Lake Nokomis Lutheran Church prides ourselves as being a welcoming place. This is a place where children are safe. This is a place where people are invited to come as you are. This is a place where the risen Christ invites us wherever you are, however you feel, whatever reasons you are here. But one person questioning one guest's right to be here casts doubt on our claim to be welcoming. By God's grace, we have this church. And by God's mercy, we are allowed into God's holy presence. And by God's generosity, we have a huge, beautiful building. And by God's Spirit, we are called to be a welcoming community here. But this building is not ours. Many of you invested countless hours and deep felt care in this place and come on your time off to make sure things are ready for worship and clean and serve and prepare. And many of you serve hard in counsel and teaching children and providing hospitality and making worship glorious, and your love and labor are certainly appreciated. But this building is not ours. And this church is not ours. What we say and what we do and what we assume about others reflects on God's church, reflects on God's kingdom values. The Lord's 10 Commandments are not some abstract minimum to mark being good. The Lord's commandments are descriptions of God's kingdom, descriptions of how God's kingdom plays out. The Lord's 10 Commandments are descriptions of what Lake Nokomis Lutheran Church is to look like. Church is not the building, and church is not what happens in this sanctuary. Church is a sign and an example of God's kingdom of love and acceptance and of mercy and of welcome. Not prohibitions on behavior, but the 10 Commandments are how we show our love for God and for our neighbor.